All right. Hi, everyone. A while ago, I asked whether or not there would be any interest of me to show off the creation of a morph from scratch, like essentially taking through to the whole process of getting the meshes in and then setting up some kind of interesting transition that uses these meshes. So here we are. This is mostly unrehearsed, so we'll see what happens. It will be an adventure. Now, when I asked which meshes I should use for this video, there were a lot of responses with like the staples of computer graphics. We have the Stanford Bunny, pretty much like one of the most common computer graphics models. We got the Blender monkey head called Suzanne. We have the Utah teapot and the dragon, which is a fairly well-known scan. Pretty well-known meshes. So as you can see, I already brought those into Unreal as meshes, and I set up some kind of interesting materials or different materials so we can differentiate those. Now, the first thing we need to do when we want to make a morph is to capture the essence of these models. And in fact, the whole morph system is called the essence system. And so you can see over here, I've got the meshes again, and some of them are encased in this kind of box, which has the cameras around it. And this is what we call the capture stage. So this is what will kind of convert the mesh into something that the morph system can use. And then you can see there's kind of a duplicate of all of these right in front of it. And this is the morph preview. So this is essentially a distance field representation that just shows you the preview of this capture. So that's what you can see here. Now, I haven't done all the meshes. I've done like these three, the dragon, teapot, and the bunny, but I haven't done the Blender Suzanne. So let's start with that. So the first thing we need to do is essentially to bring in the capture stage. And for that, I will find the essence morph system, and essentially we're gonna bring in the capture stage, which is this one here. Now, for the capture stage, essentially we need to kind of do it nicely tight fitting around the monkey head. So we're gonna just put it at the same location and scale it in a second. I'm actually gonna move all of these things into my folder up here, just a bit cleaner, and actually gonna give it a better name, Capture Suzanne, in case I ever need to find it. So what I like to do is just make sure they really actually tightly fit. So I'm gonna use the top view, and I'm gonna scale the capture stage so it kind of is just big enough to contain a model. And then if I go back to perspective, since this is a fairly symmetrical model, you can see it's kind of nicely in the middle there. All right, so now that we've got the capture stage ready, we need to set up a data asset into which we can capture the essence of this model. So we're gonna go up here, more from scratch, and I'm gonna create an essence. And sometimes, I don't know why, it just doesn't create it the first time. So we're gonna give it a name. Oops. So I'm gonna prefix the _a here just so I can easily find it later when we wanna put it into a morph. Okay, so now we essentially need to tell the capture stage into what asset it should capture into. So on here, we have the essence, and we're gonna set it to the one we just created. I'm gonna make the resolution a bit bigger. I think for Suzanne, we can go with a 1K cube map. And then I need to tell it, so this is kind of optional, but you can essentially just fix the actors that it should capture rather than let it figure out this manually. And so that's what I'm gonna do here. Okay, I think we're all ready. So let's capture the essence of this here, of Suzanne. So this will take a second. Essentially, it renders the mesh from all of these 6 angles on the cube using orthographic projection. And then it takes the color information and information about the normals and the roughness and the AO, and puts this into 2 cube maps, which I'll show you in a second, and then has created a previous scene, which for some reason is scaled. So I'm gonna put it at the same location like the other ones, so we kind of have this also here. Okay, so let's quickly take a look at the essence. So this is pretty good as a representation. It reflects this pretty well. So here we are. This is what an essence asset looks like. Essentially, it contains information about which mesh you captured and where it was, and if you have any material overrides, the scale it was at. If you have a distance field override, we'll see it here. And you also have these 2 cube maps. So these are the color maps it grabbed when it captured the meshes. Not much here in the second one, but you can kind of see that, you know, these are the different views. I think you can kind of have a 3D view. Now, normally you use cube maps for reflection maps, so this doesn't really help us much. But one thing you'll notice that you have color information even outside of the areas where there was no mesh. And this is some code we wrote just to make sure that no matter where we sample, even though we shouldn't sample in these areas, there's some kind of valid color information, which it essentially figures out based on the closest surface it can find. All right, so now this is Unreal and a custom plugin, so we're gonna just save this whole stuff, shebang. In fact, I will save this scene. I'm gonna call it A, just in case. We never know if it crashes, and then I want to be able to go back to this. It's always good practice. Okay, so now we have the essences of all of these meshes. And actually, I'm gonna put the preview. Oops. Morph. I don't know why it's here. It's up here, so I can actually disable all the things. So I'll disable the showcase, and I might even disable this in a second as we start working on the morph. So now we're gonna go over here, and we're actually gonna start working on the actual morph now that we have all the parts that we need. And essentially what we wanna do, we wanna put 2 things here that we need. One is the actual like morph actor type. So let's find that. Again, this comes from our essence plugin, which is here. And we're gonna take a BP essence scene sequenceable because we wanna put some kind of transition on it. And in fact, we're gonna give this a name. Just call it the morph. Always good. Just very obvious. And then the other thing we'll need is we need a level sequence that we can put the transformation animation or like cutscene essentially into it. So again, we're gonna create a level sequence, which it again doesn't like to create the first time around, but the second time, I don't know. I'm gonna call it sequence the morph. In fact, just call it A in case we ever want to have more than one sequence, because often what you want to have is a morph like a door, right? You have a sequence that opens the door and then a sequence that closes the door. For stuff like the bridge I showed, you even have multiple sequences of like different parts of the morph appearing, for example. Okay, so let's start setting this up. We're gonna do a little bit of maintenance first before we get into interesting bits. So we're gonna actually set up the sequence that we just created. We're just gonna hook it up. We're gonna call this A. That's the sequence. That's really all we need to do here. Before we get too deep into it, one thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna set all the quality settings to like high quality, so we can, you know, actually see without hopefully minimal artifacts what we're doing. Now, this is something we would need to change if we were to actually put it into the game. So here, so I said like essentially shader LODing. So in the shader, it will figure out how much computational effort it should use to render the morphs. And so we're doing something where if you're closer to the camera, it will spend more time kind of rendering high quality morph representation. If it's further away, it will use few computational resources. But for now, I'm gonna set the number of rays we're gonna shoot. 64 is pretty good. Or sorry, not rays to shoot. The number of steps to march along the view ray to find the morph surface. We're gonna make sure we don't have any minimum step size. And in terms of finding the surface, we're gonna pretty much just want to find the actual surface. So set this to 1. And this should be it for kind of the basic maintenance. So now we can actually get started. So we kind of have to figure out what do we want to do. So right now you can see I have this little icon here, which has a little morphy symbol with the E, which means there's actually no morph scene in there. It doesn't know how to show anything, so it has this little icon. We have a scene root component. The scene root component already is a morph like scene graph operation, which is just set to union. So what we'll do, let's just add a mesh. So we're gonna add an essence scene mesh. And I think what I'll do, I will take the bunny for starters. So here we have our bunny. And yeah, let's just leave it where it is, I guess. Okay. Actually, let me hide the capture stage back there too. So there's nothing preventing us from seeing the world. So this what we're seeing right now is already like a distance field representation. You can see it. It's not quite as high quality as like the actual real mesh that we imported, but it's good enough. Good enough for what we want to do and for the game, in fact, because often they're just part of the scene, they're not the full screen. But even if they were, you can always increase the quality by increasing the resolution of the distance field representation. Okay, so I think what we want to do as the base, I probably want to do some kind of crossfade between two meshes. So let's set up the broad strokes first, and then we add iteratively more detail to this to make it look more interesting. So what I'll do, I actually add a essence scene operation. Now this is technically not necessary, but I'm gonna call this the main crossfade. And I'm gonna put our mesh in here, and in fact, even for the mesh, I'm gonna give it a name so I know what we're looking at. I'll call this bunny, and this will be a crossfade. Now, a crossfade always needs two elements, so I'm gonna add the other one. Let's see. I think why don't we go to the teapot? So we're gonna do type it, yeah, teapot. And we're gonna set the teapot asset here. So we have two of them in here. Now the teapot, let's make it a little bit bigger so it kind of aligns with the bunny more, although that's not strictly necessary, but just to make it better morph. So we're gonna do something like that, scale it. So you can see these are just more or less normal components that you can move around just like any other component in Unreal. So we want to make this a crossfade, and for crossfades you have to tell the system like which is the beginning and what is the end representation, and this is done by setting the operand index. Now in the beginning I was trying to do this based on the component order in the tree, but it turns out in Unreal that's not guaranteed to be deterministic, so sometimes you would load and the component order would have flipped. I think just because it loads these asynchronously, sometimes they don't get added in the same order. So now we just have to be more explicit about it. Okay, so now we can actually turn this into a crossfade, and we can see like it turns this into this horrible mess here. But pretty much what we can do is now have a slider that allows us to kind of go between both of these. In fact, why don't we start with our sequence that we have and put this in. In fact, we're going to save. So here's our sequence. I'm going to put it here. I don't think I'm going to dock it. Normally you could dock it at the bottom of the screen, but I want to have maximum screen real estate, but I just want to show you now what I'm doing. So I've got the morph selected. I'm gonna add this as our kind of main actor. I actually don't need the main transform node, but I will use our main crossfade as one of the animation tracks. And in fact, what I'll use is the alpha. And I actually want to start with 0, so I'm gonna set this. So maybe we start after kind of a few seconds. I'm gonna set a keyframe at 0, and then kind of at the end, well, let's see, we start at 15. I don't know, let's see how fast this would feel, and we go to 1. So now I can scrub, so you can see as I'm scrubbing, you can actually kind of see the transformation happening, and in fact you can kind of play it. So it's a speed that's kind of nice, not too interesting yet, but it is already morphing, so you can see like the shapes appearing. In fact, the stuff that I find most interesting about this is stuff like that, like where you have the T handle kind of, the teapot handle appearing. And that's the nice thing about distance fields. They kind of can just join and become one mesh without having to need to retessellate. And of course, there's a little bit of noise here, but you would have that even if you were to do it with meshes. But okay, so we have kind of like a transition, but we want to do a bit more interesting stuff. I'm actually going to move this more towards the end of the sequence, because I think what I want to do first, I want to show how you compose a scene graph. And with the bunny, no, why is it? I should remember that this is supposed to be 0. Okay, maybe because I was in the sequence. Yeah, so right now we have just 2 meshes here in our crossfade, right? But it doesn't need to be just meshes. You can have whole scene graph in here. In fact, this is what we're gonna do. I'm gonna add what I'm gonna add here. I think I'm gonna add a union. So I'm gonna take a essence scene operation, and I'm gonna call this EO Bunny and Suzanne. And I'm gonna put the bunny in here. And so now you can already see like the operand order, the component order has changed. So already, like if I were to do this order for the crossfade based on the order of components, if you just work in this, like sometimes this changes and wouldn't really be useful. So instead, we're relying on an operand index, which is set to 0. This is fine. And now I want to do something to the bunny before it does the transition to the teapot. So I'm actually going to add another mesh here. So I'm going to add a mesh, and I'm going to call that Suzanne, which is the monkey. So let's see if we'll find here. And so what I'll do, I'm going to actually make it so that the face of the bunny, we're going to replace it with the monkey face before the transition happens, and then maybe we'll do some even more interesting stuff. Okay, so we kind of just have to compose it a little bit. Now this is, since this is a full, right, just components, I can compose these nicely. Just get a rough idea where the face would be. Kind of, we're gonna keep the ears, the bunny ears are probably gonna stick, so it's gonna have 2 ears. Because one thing I always want to do but never really got a chance to get around to it is to have some kind of masking when it comes to how the scene graph is composed. But this will be funny. I think that will be good. Okay, so we have, well, maybe, anyway, we can still like tweak it, and also maybe we want to make this a little bit smaller. Let's see. Oops. Bunny head, but probably not too much. Probably not too much. Yeah, maybe this. I'll do it like this. That would be kind of funny, huh? And maybe we do like make him look more like this. Okay. So what we want to do is kind of make the head Suzanne appear on top of the bunny before the transition happens. And there are various ways of doing that. So we could scale it. This is just a union operation, which means it just adds these 2 meshes together into like one node that then the crossfade uses to blend between. In fact, I can actually, let me show you what that would look like. Again, I'm gonna save. Here's our sequence again. Oops. So you can see when I do the transition, it will just now blend between both, like the monkey and the bunny combined to the teapot. So this is kind of the transition. But I want to do something more interesting here. So I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to take Suzanne, and we are going to make it appear out of nowhere. And there are various things we can do. We can move it, which is probably what we'll do. So let's add a transform track. But the other thing we want to do is we're going to use a distance field offset. And this is kind of a nice way to make something disappear, essentially. So let's set something up. So you can see you can kind of shrink the mesh, and that's really along the kind of implicit surface representation. So if you imagine a distance field like I showed with these color codings, right? You know, the distance from the mesh, essentially you're taking the surface of the object and you're kind of shrinking it. So you put the threshold for where the surface is at ever increasing like negative distances within the object, so you can shrink it. So what we're going to do is we're going to shrink it in here. We start out maybe with 50 is always a good one. Looks like it. We're going to give it a kind of keyframe, so maybe just like that, and maybe for just a few frames we're gonna make it appear 20 frames maybe. Go to 0. So now we have a sequence, right, where this kind of appears out of nowhere. In fact, maybe we start right away. Looks like we should just start right away. Maybe 50 is too much. Maybe we should just do 40. Let's see. As long as we don't see anything else, but this is pretty good. Now, this is not super interesting yet, so let's see what we can do with this. First of all, we're gonna work on the, also save this. Gonna make the transition a bit more interesting. So sorry, the way the meshes are combined. So right now, this is a union operation, and you can see the kind of the kind of surface between them, or like the kind of wave, the frontier. It's very sharp, right? The monkey head is here, bunny is there. But the nice thing about distance field representations is that you can kind of soften the mesh transitions. So we're gonna put some smoothness on here, and start with 8. So you can always see it blends it a little bit more. 16. You can go pretty extreme here. 64 would be maybe too much. 32 is probably still too much also. Maybe 20, something like that. Now the nice thing if I do that, this kind of, when the monkey appears, you can kind of see it's just a much smoother representation, right? The way it appears, it doesn't look like it just kind of scales from the inside. It kind of just it's a much more natural, like organic looking transition. Like if you compare it, if I set it back to nothing, like it just looks like it scales in, but with this kind of transition in here, it kind of just makes it a bit more interesting. That's really the real benefit of distance field. Also, you can kind of see like the mesh, the monkey head actually grows along the distance field. Like it doesn't just scale down here, you know, where the face, where the mouth will be, kind of grows along the distance field. So this is kind of cool. And also it kind of blends a little bit, which I actually like between these two meshes. So you really have like our bunny now with the monkey head. So this is cool. Now maybe there's one more thing we can do. No, actually, let's move ahead and do something else first before we do more here. We can always come back and add more detail if we feel like we still have more things to do. Now, one thing I would like to do, I actually want to show subtractive nodes a little bit. So I'm gonna actually expand our scene graph even more. So right now we're combining Suzanne and the bunny and blending that for the crossfade, but I actually want to add one more scene graph here node, because I want to do some cutout out of this like combined monkey bunny. So let's add one more scene operation. And I'm gonna call this EO subtract. And I'm gonna add, so the bunny is gonna be number 1 in here. And then we're gonna add one more mesh that we can subtract out. So we're gonna do that. So let's see. Yeah, so it's complaining. I'll tell you why in a second. What are we gonna call this? Sub. Yeah. So it's complaining essentially because a subtract always needs two clearly defined operands, which it doesn't have. Because the second one we added has also operand index 0, and this one is operand index 0, so it doesn't know what it's supposed to subtract from what. This can be easily replaced by making this, or fixed by making this a 1. Still complaining because it still doesn't know which mesh it's supposed to use. So let's do that. I guess we'll use the dragon. So you can see for now, like the dragon is kind of additive because the scene operation so far is a union. But I actually want to make this a subtractive node. Oh, sorry, this is not what we want. Here, take the something like that. Maybe, I don't know. So let's see, we're just gonna cut out, and maybe we can move it, that would be cool. Animate it then. So what we want to do is make this a subtractive node. So yeah, well, that's what we're gonna do. So you can see it actually cut out, you can see it has cut out the dragon out of this combined monkey bunny. And that's cool, and including up here, right? And the nice thing is, so this is just a regular mesh, so you can move this around, right? So you can actually move this and scale this. I'm just gonna leave it where it was for a second. Now, one thing I want to do is make this just a bit more interesting. Well, I don't want this to be there from the beginning, but we'll animate this in a second. One thing I want to do, I just want to make this negative operation a bit more interesting. So I'm gonna add a scene warp on the subtractive mesh, and often I like to use fractals. I like fractals. So you can see like it actually like twists and churns now the inside here of this monkey. Sorry, of the dragon that's inside of the monkey bunny. And in fact, I think what we'll do for 1 second, we will switch our subtractive node back to union so we can kind of see what this looks like in additive mode. So let's work on the warp, and I'm gonna call this EOE warp sub so we know what we're looking at. Gonna make it softer on the edges, and we will possibly just make this stronger. 3 maybe. So you can see it just jiggles stuff a little bit more strongly. In a second, I'll switch back to subtractive mode. I just want to get an initial sense of what we're looking at. In fact, so I kind of want to have the main noise inside. So I'm going to move this. So this doesn't look like much at the moment. But once I switch it back to the subtractive node, subtractive mode here, it looks like this. So I wonder, it's interesting, but I wonder if maybe we want to use a different mesh. Maybe that the dragon is just a little bit too kind of long and kind of narrow. Let's actually a teapot is kind of a nice book. Oh yeah, okay, cool. Oh, this is cool. Okay, all right, so let's figure this out. We're gonna move the teapot to a more interesting place. And maybe we'll make it so it actually cuts out kind of a big chunk of this. So you can see it actually cut out like the whole top part of this, the monkey bunny now. So we're gonna still tweak this fractal a little bit. I'm not too happy about that. Yeah, okay. So maybe we want to keep our axis the way it was. No, I don't know. See, kind of looked like it was good. Okay, all right. And so there are different things we can do. We can tweak the scale now, but usually the scale is pretty good. We don't want to go too wild, I don't think, now. 1 scale of 1 doesn't help us. 2, 4, no, maybe 3 is good. Maybe I do need more detail. Let's see. Okay. And maybe we just need more punch. And then go back actually to so as you can see, there's a lot. You can spend a lot of time just tweaking things. Okay, so here we're getting somewhere. We're getting somewhere. So I do maybe want a bit more detail. Let's see. Okay, this is starting to look cool. Okay, let's make the Terminator. Oops. Let's make the Terminator smaller. Oh wait, do we make bigger? Okay, cool. So we're getting somewhere. We're getting somewhere. So we can see that we are. So we can kind of like see, right? We can eat up the whole mesh if we wanted to do this like this. I'm actually gonna leave it at 1. Obviously, you can rotate this boy, right? So you can kind of see, actually, you can kind of, when you rotate, you can kind of get a sense of where the teapot is with this handle. Actually, we're gonna do like sideways, maybe. Maybe that's not too interesting. I don't know. Oops. So. Okay, this is starting to look kind of cool. Yeah, so kind of cool. So it's kind of eating the inside of this monkey brain. We're kind of chewing a piece out of it. I set that. Maybe I set this to 2. Not that it matters too much, I think. And then there's just a whole bunch of other values you can tweak. 3. Maybe actually we want not so much detail noise here. Figure out where is a good location. So this kind of looks pretty neat. And this is definitely something that would be tricky to do with regular meshes, right? Just chewing out a piece of mesh, they can go around and kind of look at it from different angles. And this would still work for the crossfade. So let me show you what this would be like. Now we need to make this negative part appear in some way. We'll do that in a second. But you can see, so this works both with the blend in, right? So, and then also when the crossfade happens, like this negative parts, like it just takes the subtraction of these nodes, these meshes into account and just blends them nicely, which is really cool. So, but what we want to do, I think we want to have the monkey head appear and then maybe have the subtraction kind of appear also. So let's start out. I think we might do the same trick. We're gonna take the subtractive mesh and we're gonna use, let's see if the distance field offset works. Looks like it does. So again, we're gonna start maybe with 40. No, 40 is not big enough. To 50. Set our breakpoint. It's not breakpoint. Sorry, our keyframe, and just maybe start to go to 0 or something. Kind of. Let's see what this looks like. So this appears, and then right. So maybe you want to separate these, that one happens after another. That's the kind of nice thing about the morph tech, since it's so interactive. You can kind of just play with this and just see in real time what this will be like. So this is already kind of cool. Okay, so I think the next thing we want to do, I like this so far. I want to make the transition a little bit more interesting. So right now, it just kind of does the blend all over the place at the same time, but I think let's add a little transition here. And the way we do this is we're gonna have the main crossfade here, and we are going to add a transition node. Gonna add a transition node. We might even use a spline. I'm not entirely sure. And so already we should see. Oops, this is not. Wait. So first of all, always name your things properly. So we're gonna call this ET, so essence transition main crossfade. just so we can find this thing later in the when we animate it in the sequencer. Not that we have to transition figure this out. So let's see what this transition looks like. So we have right now a transition that's kind of a linear thing, so you can kind of see that's from the beginning, from the bottom to the top. You can see the sphere moving. We don't want that. Let's see, radio out is always good. So it just kind of would start this, but I think what it will do, well, we could do linear by rotating it, doing from one side to the other. That would be interesting. Or we can use a spline. Maybe we'll just use a spline. Okay, so for that, we will add a spline, transition spline. These are really just regular splines. In fact, I'm not even going to call this something interesting because we'll just do this. So maybe what we'll do, we'll start the transition down kind of at the tail. So we're gonna move this kind of closer to the tail here, maybe like that. So this is where kind of we'll start the transition from the monkey bunny that has a shootout part towards the Yuta teapot, the regular teapot. Okay, ooh. So this is a little bit slow because it recalculates a whole bunch of things. I guess it's normally not so slow. I know, you know. So we're gonna do it like towards the front of the face, and we're gonna see if we can do some kind of interesting arc. So we're gonna take the tangents and bend these out a little bit, like that. And we wanna move this so that it kind of is gonna follow this spline more or less, roughly. You'll see in a second. In fact, maybe we'll bend these down and just bring this up a little bit. And if you look at the crossfade node, I think you should see, normally it shows you that, we haven't set it. So right now the transition method is still set to radio out, but we're gonna switch it to Bezier spline. So the spline that's actually gonna use in a shader is this blue one, which doesn't fit as nicely. On the shader, I'm not doing a full Bezier computation, so it's just approximating the spline. So we want to get the blue one kind of an interesting place. It's already not bad because it essentially goes through the body of the bunny, right? And that's kind of what we want. So let's see what this will look like if we were to look at the sequence. Again, what we really want to mostly see now is this transitional period back here where the crossfade happens. So you can see the transition starts back here and it kind of moves, and we can actually see this. If we select it, the transitionary sphere is kind of moves through, and this is kind of cool. So it kind of swipes essentially in this arc from one side to the other. That's a pretty neat transition. Okay, yeah, that's pretty cool. So let's see if we can do a little bit, play with this a little bit more as the transition happens. So I think what we'll do is to put another spatial warp on one of the meshes to happen only during this transition. So I think we're gonna take our teapot, the final one, and this is gonna be an experiment. I'm not sure if this is gonna work out, but we're gonna put, well, I mean, don't really know if the whole thing is gonna work out. But I'm gonna put a warp on here on the teapot, and I'm gonna call this teapot. And we essentially want to animate this along with the. I mean, I could I? No, I can't. So this is something that needs to be done. It would be nice to be able to just attach it to the transition spline and just follow along, but that's currently not supported. We have to hand animate it. So just for testing purposes, we're gonna set the main crossfade to 1 for a second so we can see the final teapot. So it is applying a transformation, and it's a twist that is applying right now. Hard to see. If you do it along the axis, it's also difficult to see. But if I set it to much more, you can kind of see it twists along the thing. But that's not what we want. I think what's kind of nice is kind of a radial wave. It just wobbles the whole thing a little bit. Symmetry, I don't think that's gonna work out for us here, although symmetry is always interesting. But I don't think, yeah, that's not helps us. So I think we're actually gonna be back to our fractal, which is just the kind of thing that helps us in most cases. So we want a relatively small circle, so you can kind of see we're gonna just have an interesting way of ripping the mesh apart a little bit. We're gonna have a really smooth transitioning period, so it actually ends up at the edges in the regular mesh. And this may be actually even still too big, I don't know. But I already like this. This kind of gives a little wobbliness to it. And then maybe, so you can have more than one, warp. Let's, but I would need to animate those. Let's animate these first in a transition. So what we want to do is switch this back to 0, and we're going to open up our sequence again. So we want to essentially animate the warp for the teapot, and for that we want the transform track. Here we go. And we kind of want to follow along with the spline more or less, so we're going to start off, actually we might even start off much further than where we are. So first we're going to set the location point here, keyframe. I'm actually gonna put it maybe outside here. Oops, yeah. So you can see I'm not an animator. I don't know what I'm doing. So it's gonna move into place, and then as we're transitioning, so I kind of have to figure out on the crossfade where we are, about like middle point. So this is kind of where the workflow could definitely still be improved. So we're gonna move it kind of like that, and this already looks like it's still too big. And then I think at the end, it's pretty obvious where we want it. We want it to be back here, maybe a little bit higher even, something like that. Keyframe that. Maybe we'll actually scooch this in a little bit till it starts slightly earlier. And then we're actually moving this thing out of the range entirely, so it doesn't influence us anymore. Okay, so let's take a look what this looks like now. We're gonna start, and as the transition happens, it's kind of subtle, but you have to kind of, this wobbliness on the transition just adds a little bit more something to this. It kind of follows it more or less nicely with the spline. Although actually no, it just goes up and down. It doesn't do anything with the vertical, this aspect, the y-axis. So let's do that. Update our keyframe. So it does more like a curve like this. And let's see. I think the radius is too big of the warp. We're just a little bit too wild. Okay, we'll take this, we'll make it a little bit smaller. 96 maybe will be cool. Yeah, okay, this is good. Okay, this is cool. So this just adds a little bit. So let's see what our morph looks like so far. Monkey head appears, we're showing a piece out, and then we're transitioning over. And just this kind of, this noise just adds a little bit of this extra kind of interestingness to it, right? And actually now that I see this, I do wonder if we want to have a different one. So let's take another quick look along axes. And we would need a warp strength 5 or something. No, maybe that's too much. So sometimes having a twist is actually kind of cool. Yeah, maybe. Let's see. No, it's probably not so good. I don't know. Let's see. No, that's just too quick. If these warps get too wild, then they kind of destroy the mesh just too much, and you can't really see anything. Okay, no, I'm still not really super happy with it. What would symmetry look like if we were to use it? Probably not too interesting, huh? No. So this is what I like about the system. Since it's so interactive, you can actually like just try out different things. The radial wave or push-pull is sometimes interesting because you can this would pull it towards the, oh, that might be interesting. So we're kind of like, we're kind of pulling. Well, maybe. Of course, the opposite we could do, push it away. Minus 50? No, that's probably too much. Well, actually, that's kind of a little bit, it's too strong, of course, but kind of interesting to see what it's doing here. So just kind of putting a dent, almost like it's a balloon, you're pushing on it as the transition happens. That's kind of interesting. It gives it kind of a nice, like, rubbery feeling to it. Maybe we'll keep this. This is kind of cool. Yeah, that's kind of cool. So let's see what that looks like now. Choose it out and then whoop. Yeah, that's kind of cool actually. So now I want to see, let's save this. If I can add a second warp here. So you can have up to 2 warps per mesh. So let's try this out. If we're doing the kind of the balloon pushing, if we can also add another one to just give it some extra interesting behavior. And what we're going to do with that, we're actually going to parent it to this one. So this should work, and we're going to call that EV. Actually not sure what we're going to use here for this. Oops. Yeah, hold on. I want to use the same location for that one. And then I'm going to parent it. So now in theory, it should just animate along with this thing. And we'll find out. I have a feeling what we want is a twist along axes, but I'm not sure. And now that we have 2 warps, we might have to tell it about the second one. I don't think it finds this one. We're going to use EV warp as a second one. And we'll see what happens. So let's open our sequence again. Mostly here at the end. So you can see that it definitely is doing something, right? The second one, it's too big for sure. Although it can probably be bigger. And so we're gonna maybe 3. Now here's the thing with this is kind of the order of these way these warps get applied kind of matters, like in which order. So you can already see it kind of has this extra little twistiness to it. Now let's experiment real quick. If we use a different operand order here, if we apply this afterwards and this first, let's find out what that would look like. Probably not that different. I think I like the first one better. So I'm gonna, again, change it back to make this 1, make this 0. And then let's try just something really quickly. This is, I mean, kind of interesting. I wonder if we do some real crazy, ooh boy. Oh, nice, okay. This is obviously a little bit too crazy, but let's see what else we can do. If I were to put radial wave on it, just adds a little bit of extra noise, which is nice. Symmetry, I don't think is what we want at all here. Symmetry is just super specialized, not what we want, although it kind of gives an interesting little... Anyway, I don't think what we want. Do we want to have our fractal again? So we can have like another fractal that's on top of, maybe that's just a little bit too crazy. We would have to make this much less strong. So we can, oh, actually that's kind of cool. It just goes very crazy. Yeah, this might work. We may want to make this slightly, let's see, fractal along C. No, I think X is good. In fact, well, let's try a different let's use a different type of fractal, quaternion fractal, and then maybe that one around the z-axis. No, maybe x here. And maybe we do want to make it stronger in this case. Let's see what that would look like. So it has a little bit, and then I'm still not sure. I think we'll just stick with our Mandelbulb for now, and that's obviously way too strong now. Do one. And people probably even that is so strong, but what I'll do instead, I'll make it smaller, so we just get a little bit on the fringes there of the transition. So as the transition happens, we kind of have the warp going over this whole thing. So let's take a look what that looks like. Monkey head appears, we string appears out, and then we're doing the transition. Kind of nice, yeah, looks cool. Yeah, so we could obviously also animate these parameters during the transition. So I wonder now if we want to make this chew out part disappear or something, or make it bigger during the transition. I don't know, I'm not entirely sure about that. Distance field offset, let's just give it a try, see what, if I were to make this, oh, distance field offset is 0, right. Okay, if I were to make it 30 again, then it would just kind of become less as the transition happens. Oh, well, hold on. This should still be 0. We're starting our transition here, and then maybe we'll make it like disappear a little bit so that I have multiple things happening at the same time. Whoop. Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with this experiment so far. Now let's find a place where we can put the dragon, and we have scanned the dragon, converted it. What can we do with it? So maybe at the end of, I mean, we could add another crossfade at the very end, right? So I have still one crossfade where we fade. We can add it to the bunny, the monkey bunny, or we could just fade at the very end to have one more crossfade to teapot, and then eventually into the dragon. Well, let's try that out. So I'm gonna add the dragon here. Oops, sorry. Not quite that. We need to add a mesh. Oh, what is it complaining about? Oh, it just doesn't know which mesh to use. Dragon. Okay, so here we have the dragon at the very end. So this is all. So this would be that this dragon. Let me name this. It's just kind of there on top of this whole transition. So what we'll do is we'll make this a crossfade also at the very end, and then we just have teapot and then eventually dragon, just for the fun of it, just because we can. And we'll just make this a nice simple one. Let's see if we can align it a bit more, something like this. And this will be our scene operand 1, because that's our target mesh. And we're gonna turn this into a crossfade. And actually, the other crossfade, I haven't tried this. I'm gonna turn this into a crossfade, and we want to start with 0. Yeah, so that's good. We'll save that, and now let's go into a sequence and make this look good. Probably what we want is have another transition. That's what my guess. I'm gonna just add this to it. So we're gonna call this ET dragon, so we kind of know what this is. This is gonna be definitely linear. I think we're gonna start at the base of this. So we're gonna just so I can see the dragon, we're gonna make it so that, well, I think we'll do the same thing. We'll start over here, and we can rotate the, oops, not this. we can now rotate this, where it should start and which direction it should go, right? Like something like this. Oops. And we're gonna make it bigger and make sure it kind of aligns nicely, more or less with the shape. Oops, that's almost a little bit too long now. So maybe something like that. Blend radius 65. So what is this? 565. I just like nice clean numbers. Great. And so we have the one final one. We're gonna set this to 0. Let's go back into our sequence and add the one last thing, and I think then we're gonna be done, because I think we achieved a lot then. So we're gonna extend out our sequence a little bit. So we're here, and at the very end, leave it a little bit of breathing room, and then we're gonna add our transition, which is just the scene root in this case. And here what we wanna have is the alpha. We're gonna key it to 0, and then maybe over a couple of frames to 1. So now we have, again, like chunk, another morph at the end where the teapot actually is a dragon. Surprise. And that's kind of cool. So we're gonna move the end a little bit. Let's see, in terms of pacing, I'm not an animator and not an artist, as you can see. I have very saturated colors everywhere and simple computer graphic models. I don't have sense for timing at all, but one thing I want to show you here with this is for these crossfades, even though it's doing a transition, it kind of within the sphere of transition, it just does a simple transition. And so one thing I worked on is I have the idea of like a smooth crossfade. So let's try this out here. So you can see with a smooth crossfade, you don't have this muddled area. It just becomes much more kind of one or the other, which is if you want to have a clear frontier. Now, maybe this is not quite what we want. And for that, we can do a smoothness overlap to just make it a little bit softer, this transition. But this is actually kind of cool. So it kind of just moves over. So let's see how much we want to have the smoothness. So if I make it not smooth at all, you see it looks like this, right? If I make it really big number, it becomes more and more this kind of very clearly defined frontier. I think the first value we had with 32 is pretty good. And then the other thing to bear in mind is for transition, you can actually change the blend radius. So this is the inner sphere here. So I can make this bigger. So you can kind of go from something like this. And this is kind of nice. Okay, I think we're coming to the end of this. So let's take a look what we got. We have a bunny, monkey head appears, it chews out inner parts, it transitions interestingly to teapot, and then eventually to the dragon. And I think that's pretty cool. We've done a lot. We've showed the transitions, how to combine meshes, how to build a scene graph, how to subtract things out, how to use these kind of non-Euclidean spatial deformations, the warps, how to use the transition, various transition types and configure that. And we achieved this really cool morph. So I hope you enjoyed this, seeing the whole process, how to create a morph. Now the next step would be, put it into the game and set up some kind of trigger so you can trigger this sequence. But that's pretty much how all the morphs in Keeper were created. And as you can see, it's a very interactive process, which made it very fast to iterate on these things and very fun to really play with that, come up with cool ideas. Yeah, so I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you soon. All right, bye.